Hello, and welcome to the Amongst Romans podcast, your window to everything Italy from an outsider's perspective. Join us each week as we navigate the Italian way of life and all the adventures that come along with it. Well, it's 2025. It's been a crazy last couple of months, and that's the reason we haven't really had too many new episodes. It's just been absolutely insane here. But we're back. I'm very excited for 2025, and we'll be bringing you a whole bunch of new episodes, which will help you with your trip to Italy this year.
Yeah, there's been a lot of things going on in the background the last few months. I'm super excited and looking forward to 2025.
Now, 2025 has a lot of changes happening. So if you're planning on coming to Italy this year in particular, you should really plan ahead. Number one, the biggest thing probably that will impact your travel to Italy is the Jubilee. The Jubilee is a Catholic celebration that happens every 25 years or so. So it officially kicked off on December 24th. So for all of 2025 until January 6, 2026, you'll have a lot of pilgrims coming to Italy, by Rome in particular. I think they're expecting almost double the numbers of visitors. It's going to be very crowded. A lot of the changes that we're going to be mentioning in this episode are, well, a lot of them are related or tied into the Jubilee. But especially if you're coming to Rome, the Jubilee will really be a big factor. Basically, everything expect to be more expensive. This includes hotels, book your accommodations ahead of time because there are people who are coming for the Jubilee that have been planning this trip for years. You'll have a lot less option to choose where you're staying. Everything else like tours, flights, getting around, it's going to be very, very expensive and also very, very crowded.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of changes, like you said. I think they're actually going to be for the better for travelers. A lot of the processes are going to be more efficient, a little more streamlined, making things a little bit easier and possibly quicker for a lot of the travelers coming to Italy. Many of these changes are probably, long overdue.
One of our bigger tips, if you're coming to Italy, especially Rome, again, plan ahead. I really can't emphasize this enough. Plan ahead because you're going to be very surprised when you get to Rome, and it's going to be very busy. It's going to be expensive. And if you're planning on visiting, let's say, the Vatican, that might be not happening unless you have booked a tour ahead of time. This is a Catholic celebration, so a lot of pilgrims from all over the world will be coming. And of course, the Vatican is the seat of the Catholic Church. So they'll have a lot of events happening there. And, if you are going to be in Rome, there are a lot of other beautiful churches that you can check out. There's lots of other activities. But I would say unless you are really set on Rome, maybe, don't come to Rome for this year unless you're really into the celebrations and explore other parts of Italy.
I guess let's talk about some of the changes that are going to be occurring. One of them is actually security related, and I think that's good for everyone. It's the introduction of the ETIAS travel authorization. It's not really specifically for Italy. It's being adopted throughout the EU. It's to enhance the border security across the Schengen zone countries. So it's very similar to if you've traveled to the US from certain countries. There is the ESTA travel visa. So you would have to apply for that depending if you met some of the criterias for that specific visa.
It's not a visa in a traditional sense. It's more of like a permit. You have to fill out this form online before you travel. And, technically you shouldn't have any problems. This is just like a formality. They've been saying about implementing this system for about 4 years now, and they were supposed to implement it in 2024. Now they're saying 2025. This one, I would say it may or may not happen, but you should keep an eye on it, especially if you are traveling to Europe. So when they do implement it, you have to apply for it before you come. Otherwise, you might not be admitted in, I guess. When you get off the plane, they might turn you around.
We should probably discuss some of the details surrounding this requirement. It applies for countries outside of the EU, so that includes the US, Canada, Australia, and Japan. There is a small fee for it, so I think that's a €7 fee in comparison to other, types of visas requirements from various countries. That's pretty affordable, and it can be all done online, so it's pretty easy to get done or completed. You can fill out the forms online and get that done ahead of time.
And I think it's valid for like 3 years or until your passport expires. You don't have to do it every time you come.
There is another new introduction of the entry-exit system that's being implemented in Europe. The old way of getting your passport stamped is no longer going to be required. That's the old school way of getting things done. There's going to actually be an implementation of this, an electronic passport stamping system. They'll have fingerprints, facial scans, and it'll confirm your identity when you cross borders or enter a country. This new system will require both fingerprint and facial scans to confirm your identity. I think that this process will actually improve things. It'll make things a lot quicker instead of having to wait around and get your passport stamped manually. And I think that's something that'll make things move along a lot quicker when you're entering the country. I believe the rollout is expected to, slow things down slightly as people get used to it, and people that are working the lines are getting adapted to the specific requirements. But I think this will actually make things in the long run a lot more efficient.
I think there's going to be that whole learning transitional period, which might be a bit glitchy or confusing. If you're coming to Europe, this is all of Europe, not just Italy. You might take longer to get through an airport, let's say security or checking in. This is coming in 2025. I personally don't know if like the ETIAS system, they might delay it. But, again, this is planned for this year. So expect it when you're coming and hope for the best. Now, we should talk about another thing that's really coming out of the Jubilee, and that is a ban on self-check-ins for short-term rentals. You usually go to an Airbnb, there might be a padlock, a code that the host gives you, so when you come in, you can just enter it and get the key, and you never really have to see the host. Now, there's been a backlash against tourists, especially with short-term rentals in big cities like Rome. This is not new. It happens all over Europe. Spain has been famous for that. People in Rome are also fighting back. I think because of the Jubilee and such an influx of people coming, they also want to make sure all the guests are verified. So it's not so much to make things more complicated. It's a precaution. It's something that they're trying to implement as a safety measure. So if you're planning to coming to Italy, especially in a place like Rome, make sure that you coordinate with your host your arrival. So again, it might be a bit difficult because sometimes we've been in a situation where we were arriving, let's say 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and you want to make sure they're available to let you in because you will no longer be able to check in yourself.
Yeah, I think this rule is actually going to help out things quite a bit with security. I think also, a lot of travelers, especially if you're not familiar with the country you're visiting, first time coming to Italy, you might find that having the actual host meet you and check you in will allow you to, maybe ask some questions or get some information about the area and stuff like that. So I think it's a benefit for the traveler.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's a bit easier when you have someone there waiting for you or to let you in, show you around. If you are not a fan of that, your best option is probably going with a hotel that has a 24-hour check-in desk. Then you know for sure that there's going to be someone there when you get in and you won't have a problem finding the place or getting there, which again, it makes things a bit easier for everyone. I think there also might be a bit of confusion with this or communication with the host. So you really have to communicate with them and make sure you have everything set out before you get there and that they are there to actually greet you and let you in. Keep that in mind. It might make things a bit complicated.
Some good news actually has come out of some of these changes. The fact that airlines are increasing the number of routes and accessibility, right? So that allows a lot of the travelers to get direct flights to certain cities within Italy. Sicily has actually become a very popular destination. At one point, it wasn't the easiest place to get to for travelers. Many of the times you'd have to get connecting flights. Now there are a lot more direct flights to places like that. So I think that allows more accessibility for many travelers throughout the world.
In particular, this applies to our listeners in the US. American Airlines and Delta Airlines have introduced a number of new direct flights to Italy that are not just the Rome. They are, like you mentioned, it's Sicily or other places around. So again, if you come into Italy and you don't necessarily want to go to Rome, the idea is that you can fly to a different large city direct from North America or other parts of the world, and then explore from there. So you're not just limited in going to Rome, which again, like we said, it's going to be very busy. So I don't think they had the same idea for Canada, but definitely if you're in the US, you might have more options when you're coming to Italy.
I think depending on how popular these new routes will end up being, it'll probably expand it a lot more to other places that aren't as serviced. I think this opens it up quite a bit for travelers.
Now, let's talk about the famous tourist tax. This is another way that Italian authorities are, I'm not sure if it's necessarily to limit tourism, but maybe to make it a bit more of a, not profitable necessarily, but I think that's kind of what it is. So we know that Venice last year introduced a pilot program where they had basically like an entry fee to get into the city for people who are not staying in Venice itself. The pilot was very successful, and I think it ran for like a month, and a few certain days it wasn't continuous, and it was very profitable. It was about 3 to 10 euro, I think what it was, to get in. No, I think it was like 5 euros. So anyway, they are introducing this again. So for 2025, the fee increases, and we'll leave in the show notes, we'll leave you guys some links so you can check out how to get your pass and how much it's going to be. But that will be if you're going to Venice and you're not staying in Venice. Another tax they're introducing, also a tourist tax, applies to all other destinations. Right now, when you're staying in a hotel or even Airbnb, there is what they call like a tourist tax, which applies, you pay per night. So it was between like maybe a couple euro, depends again on the city and when you were staying. Well, now they have given a lot of the municipalities the leeway to increase it. So for example, if you're paying for budget accommodations, this might increase it by a few euro. But if you're staying in a more luxurious place, the fee might go up to 25 euro a night in addition to what you're paying for the room. This is a way to alleviate some of the strain on the infrastructure in Italy, but also maybe keep some of the people at bay from coming because they might not want to pay. But again, if you're coming to Italy in 2025, expect to pay more, especially during the high season.
This probably falls under the column of not all news is good news. So I think the tourist tax for accommodations are, a little too high, but, granted the other end of things where it helps limit over tourism in certain areas like Venice. I think that's a good thing, but I guess you got to take the good with the bad.
Another place that might be limiting tourists is the Pompeii Archaeological Park. If you're planning on visiting Pompeii, you're going to have to be a bit creative and make sure you book your tickets ahead of time. What's happening? Starting in 2025, during the high season from April to October, Pompeii is going to limit how many people they admit onto the site. Right now, you get there, whether you have a tour or if you want to get the tickets yourself and you go in, there were no limits. As of this year, they're going to introduce a daily visitor cap just to manage the foot traffic and protect the ancient ruins, which kind of makes sense because you have a lot of people walking through, damaging the site, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. I'm not sure how that's going to play out, to tell you the truth. I don't remember being there in the summertime. The last time I was in Pompeii was in November and it wasn't too bad. If you're planning on coming to Pompeii between April to October, it's probably better that you book your tickets ahead of time. I would also recommend doing a tour. Tour groups will have a priority, so you can skip the line and walk right in with your group. But if they only have a certain amount of tickets, which I think is going to be 20,000 daily visitors, So again, if you show up later in a day and they've already had the maximum number of people, you might not be able to get in. You don't want to travel all this way just to be told at the gate, sorry, we can't let you in anymore. So if you're planning on going by yourself, get there early, get your tickets ahead of time, or book a tour group and, make sure that you get there with a group so you're likely to get in and not miss out.
Yeah, I guess this is one of those detrimental items for travelers that like to do their own thing. Unfortunately, that's one of the changes that has to occur, right? It probably got so busy during peak season that they really had no choice but to limit to the number of people that can visit the sites. But yeah, it's a good way, I guess, to experience it, book ahead of time, and maybe get someone to show you around, show you the different sites, give you an explanation, be part of the tour group, and maybe even meet up with other fellow travelers.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say maybe visit off season. The last time I was there was in November. We're going to go this weekend, actually. So January, and the temperature is going to be around 14, 16 degrees. It's not bad for this time of year. It's not going to be as busy. Also, in Italy, a lot of the tourist attractions like museums and parks are free on the first Sunday of each month. So that's also something to keep in mind. I would say, yeah, come off season because Pompeii is really great when you're not sweating under the sun because there is not a lot of shade.
That's definitely a good point with regards to the heat. There's not much in the way of shelter, so you're pretty much roasting. I definitely dress for that weather, sweltering hot weather. Make sure you bring a hat, lots of sunscreen, and t-shirt and shorts, so you avoid sweating your body weight in water.
That's kind of gross.
Yeah.
So another thing to consider, this is a new thing, this just came out that I've noticed. It's Italy, certain places like, I think this has started in Milan, but also Florence and Bologna. In Milan, they already have what they call a red zone. Red zones are designated urban areas where individuals who are deemed dangerous or have criminal records are prohibited from entering. I'm not really quite sure how that's going to be set up. So if you are coming to a big city like Rome, Bologna, or Florence, expect to see heightened security measures. You'll see a lot more police. I'm not sure if they'll be stopping people, especially after certain hours. So again, be prepared. It's not to say that there's anything happening. This is just preventative because again, it's the Jubilee. So people will be traveling all over and there'll be more travelers coming in. That's something to keep in mind. You can also not go to those cities, go to small places, and I think you should be fine.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting change. I'm not sure how they're going to monitor that, but I guess they'll provide more details as they get closer to the implementation time.
I think it will be a very interesting year because I'm really not sure what this whole Jubilee going to look like. I'm actually kind of tempted to go to Rome. Maybe next week I'll go for like a day and see what's happening because if you came to Italy last year or towards end of the year, or if you saw anybody who went to Rome in particular, they were disappointed because they had a lot of paneling around certain sites. The Trevi Fountain was totally blocked off, so people couldn't really go in. And now I think there's a barrier, which makes it, again, very difficult to see the Trevi Fountain. So keep that in mind if you're going to Rome. They've been doing a lot of improvements. So I think if you come to Rome maybe next year, after the Jubilee is over, you'll find a much improved city. I think they were improving roadworks, they were improving subways. They've been doing a lot of work to prepare for this. So again, I think you'll have a better experience in Rome in particular in 2026. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're better off maybe postponing if you really need to visit Rome. I'm not a fan of limiting access to archaeological sites, major sites like the Trevi Fountain and stuff like that. So I probably would stay away personally, unless you really have something you want to plan a trip to Italy and just visit. There's lots of other options other than Rome and major cities.
Yeah, it's going to be busy. Rome has always been busy. There's no such thing as off-season in Rome anymore. I don't know if you really want to be surrounded by all these crowds. You're going to have so many people. And those are not just regular tourists. Those are all pilgrims coming in. There are going to be a lot of people, competition for housing. The cheaper apartments, the cheaper hotels are probably going to be sold out first. So you'll either have very limited choices or you'll have to pay a lot more. You might not be able to go see certain places. I would say if you're not coming here for the Jubilee and you want to go see the Vatican, forget it. I don't think I would even bother going to Rome unless you were going on a tour group because that will take you in. You don't have to wait in line. But I think Rome is going to be crazy this year, maybe closer to December more so because that's going to be the end of it. And of course, with Christmas, they have a lot more going on church-wise. So maybe avoid coming in December. Definitely avoid coming in the summer. I feel like I'm not really selling Rome this time, but honestly, my personal opinion, if I was going to recommend it to you, it would be don't go to Rome this year. There's so many places in Italy that you can go and explore that you will not miss going to Rome this year. If you are planning on going to Rome, plan it for the following year, and I think you'll enjoy it a lot more.
If you have lots of trips planned, just in general to Italy and Europe, there are a lot of options. It's probably disappointing that you won't be going to, to a place like Rome, but there are, like Kasia mentioned, there's lots of other great cities in the country. Italy is such a rich country that when it comes to seeing beautiful things and historical sites, you're a stone throw away from seeing something amazing. So I don't think there's any disappointment if you do make a trip out to Italy and not go to Rome.
So with that, we'll leave you with a number of resources in the show notes. If you haven't listened to our episode on the Jubilee, I encourage you to do so. There are also links to a blog post with more information, what to expect, what things to book, and so on. Thanks for listening, and we hope you're planning your trip to Italy and our podcast can make it easier for you. So we'll be back with more episode, and we'll catch you in the next one.